Greetings, friends. My name is Igor Gavrishchak. This is the YouTube platform of Channel 24. It is with great pleasure that I welcome our guest whom I have been waiting for a long time. This is Akil Rustamzadeh, an Azerbaijani military expert. Akil, hello. We have finally met, and I would like to discuss with you what has been happening in the Russian-Ukrainian war in recent months. It is also worth touching upon Azerbaijan, Russia's role and the new round of conflict that emerged after the events in Yekaterinburg, and to understand where it may lead. Let's start with the summer of 2025. It has clearly been a bad summer for Russia.
Начну с того, с начала лета 25 года. Оно как-то не задалось для России.
I recall June 1st and June 3rd, the attack on the Crimean Bridge. In our first conversations, you explained to me and to the audience that asymmetric actions were necessary, given the enemy's superiority in resources, manpower, equipment, and Russia's much more developed military-industrial complex. The SBU Operation Spider's Web conducted on June 1st can serve as an example. Yes, these are asymmetric actions, although formally all power and military structures of Ukraine are united into a single formation called the Defense Forces of Ukraine. Nevertheless, this operation was more of an ad hoc rather than a classic military operation.
Все силовики военные находятся в одной структуре, называется Сила обороны Украины, да? Но это была больше специальная.
This is asymmetric warfare, and regardless of how it is conducted, the operation is part of Ukraine's defensive strategy. Such methods are a vivid example of asymmetry. By the way, Israel conducted a similar operation against Iran on its territory. Asymmetric actions are becoming a new trend. The operation was extremely successful. Its participants were probably honored with ranks and positions, because it is one of the most successful operations of special services and military for a long time. I would like to clarify, on June 1st, the strategic aviation of the Russian Federation, which is part of the nuclear triad, was hit.
Наверное, люди, которые этой операцией занимались, получили звания, там, должности, потому что это одна из самых удачных операций спецслужб, в принципе, и военных, можно сказать, за очень длительное время.
Хотел бы вас уточнить. 1 июня была поражена стратегическая авиация Российской Федерации, которая относится к ядерной триаде.
It would seem that such attacks should prompt a nuclear power to declare, "This is an existential threat to our statehood. We are ready to use nuclear weapons." Russia's full-scale invasion of non-nuclear Ukraine was accompanied by many pretexts under which the Kremlin threatened a nuclear strike, but never decided to do so. What do you think was the reason? Fear, pressure from China, the existence of international agreements? And wasn't it the proof that the security service of Ukraine showed Russia is not worth being afraid of?
Он все-таки на это не решился. Как вы считаете, почему боится, не разрешают Китай, есть какие-то договоренности? И не есть ли это показатель того, что именно Служба безопасности Украины показала, что не нужно бояться России?
Вы знаете, даже больше удар.
This was a strike that was more damaging to the nuclear triad than the destruction or annihilation of nuclear missile launchers. The damage to 2 early warning radars was particularly significant. It was critical because Russia lost the ability to track intercontinental and intermediate-range missiles over a wide area. There are 2 key aspects that even Russian propaganda, with all its resources, cannot interpret otherwise. That is why I believe that a cessation of hostilities is unlikely.
Межконтинентальные ракеты, ракеты средней дальности на довольно огромном участке нашего континента. И тогда они как бы промолчали. А почему бы не промолчать сейчас? Вы знаете, есть 2 как бы составляющие, которые никак как бы даже российская пропаганда при всех ее возможностях, при всех ее мощностях не сможет преподнести по-другому. Это Почему я говорил, что остановка боевых действий маловероятна? Что
After
для того,
almost
чтобы
4 years of war, what
руководство Российской
scoreboard will the
Федерации
leadership of the
выдержало
Russian Federation
4
show
года?
its citizens?
4
What
года
will it
они
present to the
сопротивлялись.
world community if it comes to the use of nuclear
То же
weapons?
самое счет
For what
по
reason could the
Крыму
aggressor decide
имело
to
вообще
take such a
какое-то
step?
значение?
There were probably signals. China remains one of the most powerful levers of pressure on
Может
Russia.
применить
It is neither
ядерное
interested in Russia's strengthening
послужило
nor
причиной.
in its sharp decline. The US and European countries
Скорее
also
всего,
play their
сигнал.
role.
Я
The use
думаю,
of
что
nuclear weapons is a
одним
step,
из
the
самых
consequences of
крупных
which are hard to
боевых
imagine. That is why stopping hostilities now is an extremely
влияний на
difficult decision for the Russian
развитие
leadership.
Китая.
The domestic situation can be controlled by tightening measures,
Россия.
but you cannot
Потому что
tighten the
Российская
screws on the
Федерация
whole
не
world.
заинтересована, чтобы Россия очень сильно упала. Ну и Соединенные Штаты и Европейское сообщество. Вы знаете, если будет применено ядерное оружие, то это даже немыслимо представить, каким. Поэтому, да, вот я говорю, что вот остановка боевых действий сейчас сложная вещь для руководства Российской Федерации и применение ядерного оружия. Это применение ядерного оружия несет в себе даже намного большие риски, чем, скажем, ситуация внутри, которую можно подзакрутить, да, гайками.
Egil, I would like to mention that the Russian Federation's summer offensive campaign is actually underway. According to the latest data published by the EEC, Russia has lost 31,000 dead on the front in 2 months, which is a record loss since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. We look back to the Kursk and now Sumy regions where fighting continues. The latest reports from the region indicate a weakening of the offensive potential of the Russian forces and certain successes of the Ukrainian defense forces. This is not a subjective assessment, but a statement of facts. How would you characterize the course of the summer campaign? Is Russia managing to achieve its goals, given such significant losses?
Пламя, загорание наступления россиян придавили, и даже есть успехи вооруженных сил Украины, оборонительных сил Украины. Это я не как украинец говорю, это по факту то, что существует. Как бы вы сейчас, Агиль, охарактеризовали, что происходит с летней кампанией, добивается ли своих целей и, ну, конечно же, потери?
Everything you have said adds up to the big picture. In addition to the asymmetric approach to combat, I have always drawn attention to the insufficient use of defensive lines, engineering barriers, mine explosive systems, and fortifications. Their implementation requires effort, and that is why every kilometer that the Russian army advances comes with serious losses. You mine the terrain, use kill zones and other methods I mentioned earlier. That explains the increase in losses, 31,000 in 2 months, and I think that figure is quite real. Russia is at its highest casualties since the start of hostilities. As for speculation about its decline, that is premature in my opinion.
Вы применяете kill-зону, вы применяете то, что все, что я указывал ранее. Поэтому, да, у них и как бы потери будут расти, и цифра 31 тысяча за 2 месяца, я думаю, что это реальная цифра. Потому что Россия ведет из-за всего того, что я обозначил, она несет максимальные потери с начала боевых действий. А вот что касается, что она как бы угасает, я думаю, что это преждевременно.
In Sumy region, the Ukrainian army has stabilized the situation, while in Donetsk region it remains tense. Russian forces are concentrating their main pressure there. According to available estimates, Russia still has the reserve to maintain the current intensity of hostilities for about a month. We are now at the equator of the summer offensive campaign, and we can judge from the dynamics that the pressure peaked last week, which was the maximum. Based on the balance of forces and means, we can predict that the Russians will maintain their current pace for a while longer, being on the crest, and then the decline will begin.
Этой операции, да, летней наступательной операции. И по ней уже можно судить, что уже ничего более, что было, скажем, неделю назад, по некоторым данным, максимальное давление российской армии за все лето было где-то неделю назад. Вот это было максимум. Вот это мы сможем смело как бы спрогнозировать, потому что по раскладу сил и средств это уже вырисовывается. Но сказать, что уже все пошло на убыль, нет. скорее всего, еще где-то, вот это, знаете, вот гребень, да, на гребне они еще чуть удержатся, ну а потом уже как бы будет спад.
Агиль, хотел бы вас также спросить, вот много, очень много сейчас говорят
Agil, I'd like to ask about a hot topic, kill zones and their link to drone use. In the 21st century, unmanned technologies are rapidly evolving, and Ukraine shows notable progress, recognized by international partners. Surface unmanned platforms, in particular, represent a serious and separate aspect.
Мы даже говорим о надводных безэкипажных дронах, это вообще отдельный разговор.
The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, said today that in June every third target hit on the front line, be it enemy manpower or equipment, was destroyed with the help of unmanned systems. It can be stated that Ukraine is effectively compensating for the lack of resources in the war against Russia through the active use of drones. It is interesting how the topic of shortage of artillery ammunition has disappeared from the media field. The reason is simple. Drones have displaced artillery and armored vehicles. Especially in terms of surface unmanned platforms, Ukraine is the leader and will soon hold the lead among its allies. However, its partners are actively developing technologies, and in a year's time, there will be more advanced solutions. Now Ukraine is betting not so much on technological sophistication as on mass production, and so far it is working. The situation is similar for aerial drones. You are number one, despite the fact that you do not strive to introduce advanced software or artificial intelligence. Thanks to your solutions, according to Russian sources, the kill zone of Ukrainian drones now reaches 50 kilometers from the front line.
Несомненно, вы тоже номер один, но опять-таки здесь масштабность, вы не особо заморачиваетесь там на искусственный разум, там на продвинутое программное обеспечение. И вот благодаря вашим технологиям сейчас я цитирую то, что говорили россияне, буквально вчера читал. Они сетуют, что украинская киллзона сейчас составляет 50 километров от линии фронта.
They note that because of the use of Ukrainian drones, there has been a transformation of vehicles in the Russian army, degradation rather than evolution, from tanks to motorcycles, buggies, and cars with cut-off roofs. At the same time, Russia has also had successes in the number of drones, with which it influences Ukrainian logistics to a certain extent. However, Russian Telegram channels complain that Ukraine is using more drones, ensuring continuous control. One attacks, another takes pictures, a third replaces the damaged one. Several drones operate over one area at the same time. Russia does not yet have such a system. In fact, the first full-fledged drone war is underway, and the results are obvious. It is a revolution in military affairs.
И один атаковал, повредился, то есть в небе остался один дрон. Уже следующий взлетел, чтобы вот как бы вот постоянный конвейер, да, у вас постоянно одним местом 3-4 дрона крутится. У россиян пока такого нет. Устроили первую войну дронов, что сказать. И результаты налицо. Это революция в военном деле.
Agil, there are increasing claims that Russia has chosen a strategy of war of attrition long before the current stage. Now there are also claims in Ukraine about preparations for a protracted confrontation. To what extent, in your opinion, is it possible to say that the war has really moved into the phase of mutual exhaustion of armies? And if so, who has the advantage in this strategy, Russia or Ukraine? The offensive side is always in a less favorable position, while the defensive side has the advantage of being entrenched in the terrain and being able to use weapons with optimal effectiveness. As long as Ukraine conducts a defensive operation, it can significantly deplete the enemy. The experience in the Donetsk region confirms this. Russian sources note that the Ukrainians have implemented a new system of defense fortifications in which it is difficult to inflict a massive defeat at a single point. Positions are now distributed, with passages and exits between them, and it is difficult for drones to detect targets. As such defensive lines are reinforced along the entire front line, it is increasingly difficult for the Russians to conduct offensive actions.
Их позиции распределены, между ними ходы, выходы, дрона очень сложно там найти чего-то. Вот увеличение вот таких вот оборонительных линий по всей линии фронта россиянам все сложнее будет наступать.
The enemy's losses are much higher. The experience accumulated by Ukraine makes it possible to wage war in such a way that for one dead Ukrainian fighter, there are 5 or even 7 Russian ones. This is a war of attrition on the battlefield, which makes it possible to wage it for years. However, the strategy of attrition has a flip side, strikes on the rear. There is an imbalance here. Ukraine lacks heavy ballistic missiles and a sufficient number of attack drones, so the enemy can inflict tangible damage. Agile, as a military specialist, you know that even if there is a surrender, wars end at the negotiating table. Dialogue is necessary to agree on something and sign something. How do you assess the relevance of the meetings of the delegations of Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul in the current circumstances?
Агиль, вы как военный, мы, кажется, даже с вами говорили, вспоминали фразу, что практически все войны, когда нет, ну даже если есть капитуляция, все равно они заканчиваются за столом переговоров. Что-то, да, и подписывают, да, для того, чтобы что-то подписать, о чем-то договориться, нужно встречаться. Вот вы как военные, как вы считаете, сейчас вот эти встречи, они нужны в Стамбуле делегации Украины и России?
How obvious is it that the Kremlin, including the United States, is dragging out the war and negotiations? Negotiations have always been part of military conflicts. They are necessary for exchanging prisoners, bodies of the dead, and solving humanitarian issues. There have also been phases of truce in Ukraine's history during which such exchanges took place. This is a fundamental function of dialogue. As for discussions on the future of the war, obviously Ukraine is capable of continuing the resistance, while Russia is not making strategic gains but can strike cities. Neither side has the strategic advantage to dictate terms. When wars do not end in a clear military and political victory, only the country with the advantage can impose its will in establishing a truce. At the current stage, neither Ukraine nor Russia has such an advantage.
Вы знаете, не вы знаете, что вы выдерживаете, потянете. А они знают, что как бы не могут, да, получить что-то. Но они могут, скажем, знают, что могут разрушать ваши города. Но ни у одного из вас нет стратегического преимущества в силу, чтобы диктовать свою волю. А когда войны не заканчиваются военно-политической победой какой-либо стороны, то, скажем, при установлении перемирия, сторона, которая, конечно, имеет стратегические преимущества, она может диктовать свою волю. Но проблема в том, что ни у вас, ни у россиян стратегического преимущества нет.
Some Western politicians claim that Ukraine allegedly does not possess the necessary cards. But this is nothing more than demagoguery. Neither side has a strategic advantage, so achieving results through negotiations is extremely difficult. If we recall the shelling of cities since the meeting of Ukrainian and Russian delegations in Istanbul on May 15 to 16, the number of attacks on peaceful cities, civilian deaths, and destruction of Ukrainian infrastructure has increased significantly. Even US President Donald Trump mentioned that more than 700 drones were fired at Ukraine overnight. What is your assessment of this, Agil? Is this a manifestation of impotence on Russia's part, an inability to achieve military objectives, and an attempt to inflict maximum damage by available means? Or is it a strategic goal to keep the population of Ukraine in fear, provoking emigration and degradation of the country?
Более 700 беспилотников летели на Украину. Как вы это оцениваете, Агиль? Это бессилие и результат того, что Россия, Кремль не могут достигнуть военным путем своих целей, поэтому они все, что могут, то и обстреливают. Или здесь еще есть и стратегическая, опять-таки, цель Кремля обстреливать, чтобы держать украинцев в ужасе, чтобы они уезжали, чтобы Украина опустошала и превращалась вот на страну третьего мира.
This is a whole set of tasks that the Kremlin is implementing under the current conditions. First of all, production facilities and the energy sector are being hit, and the killing of civilians in Kiev serves as a way to keep the capital in constant tension. This is not just about powerlessness. Such attacks are used as a tool to pressure Western leaders, a demonstration of what the Kremlin is capable of. This is a complex strategy aimed not only against Ukraine, but also at influencing external political players. The Kremlin has no other suggestions. It actually shows, I won't do it, but I could. Some leaders respond to such messages, so it's important to look at the full range of goals that the Kremlin has in its actions. By the way, Agil, I would like to turn to your home country, Azerbaijan, and discuss the current relations between Baku and Moscow.
Задачи, которые ставит перед собой Кремль. Ему больше нечего ставить, да, на стол. Что он какому-то лидеру он говорил, что ну вот ради тебя я этого не сделаю, но хотя я могу сделать это и это. И некоторые лидеры ведутся на это. То есть тут надо смотреть комплексные цели, которые выполняет Кремль при атаке вас дронами, там, баллистическими ракетами.
Агиль, и, конечно, хотел бы вспомнить ваш родной Азербайджан и то, что сейчас происходит между Баку и Москвой.
On December 25th, Russian air defenses shot down an Azerbaijani civilian plane that crashed into Kazakhstan. The pilots heroically tried to reach land to avoid casualties at sea, but Russian operators ignored the signal. It became the first serious conflict between Moscow and Baku, and the Russian president never apologized. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev apparently remembered it well. On December 27th, 50 Azerbaijanis were detained in Yekaterinburg, 2 of whom were killed under unclear circumstances. In response, the media in Baku shut down propaganda channels and agents were detained. Erdogan recently arrived in Azerbaijan and said that Aliyev was not interested in escalating the conflict, but there was no confirmation of Baku's willingness to take the situation for granted. The impression is that the sides are expecting either an apology or an explanation. Against the background of events in Syria and Iran, where Russia has shown limited involvement, Turkey and Azerbaijan seem to realize that it is possible to increase influence in the region and strengthen their positions in the Caucasus.
Алиев и Баку принимают то, как все есть. Я так понимаю, что ждут извинений или объяснений. Насколько сейчас серьезная проблема в регионе, насколько сейчас плохие отношения между Баку и Москвой, и насколько Турция и Азербайджан понимают в светле событий в Сирии, в Иране, где Россия ничего не сделала, что в регионе можно набирать силу и больше влиять на Кавказе.
I will answer your question through the prism of relationships. After the collapse of the USSR and independence until 2014, the Ukrainian society and elite had no serious problems with the Russian Federation. The situation was similar in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and especially Belarus, where relations were friendly. In contrast, countries such as Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova have had a painful journey as they faced Russian attempts to prevent them from becoming independent states. In 1991-1992, Russia pressured Moldova, and similar actions were directed against Georgia and Estonia. The economic blockade of Azerbaijan ended only in 1997 thanks to the efforts of President Heydar Aliyev, who managed to overcome it thanks to his personal authority. It was during that period from 1991 to 1997 that Ukrainians actively helped Azerbaijan, albeit on a commercial basis, while Russia imposed sanctions and restricted development. This is why Azerbaijani society today feels more sympathy for the Ukrainians than for the Russians. It is important to realize that Azerbaijan and Russia have never been truly partners.
Вот почему население Азербайджана больше симпатизирует к украинцам, чем к россиянам. Вот именно это тот период, 91-97 год, когда украинцы как бы все, что могли для нас, ну, само собой за деньги, но делали. А эти сделали нам экономическую блокаду. То есть надо понимать, что азербайджанско-российские отношения это не были, скажем, такими отношениями, никогда не были такими отношениями.
If you ask any citizen of Kazakhstan, he or she is unlikely to call Russia an enemy, whereas our experience with it was much more conflictual. We captured Russian tankers engaged in combat operations. This was seen and felt by everyone. I may be answering lengthily, but I wanted to convey the philosophy of this relationship. After 2012, we formed a new political strategy aimed at a multi-vector foreign and defense policy. By a number of political decisions, Russia stopped seeing us as an enemy and started treating us as a non-threatening neighbor. However, after the 2020 war, Moscow began to see Azerbaijan as overly independent. The Karabakh conflict was the wound through which Russia put pressure on Armenia and Azerbaijan. When Armenia acted contrary to Moscow's interests, tensions mounted. When it was necessary to put pressure on us, the Karabakh problem escalated again.
Перестала как бы смотреть на нас как на врага, а, скажем, как на партнера, как на соседа, который не вредит. После 2020 года, после войны, Россия задумалась, что Азербайджан становится излишне самостоятельным. Почему? Потому что карабахская проблема – это была рана, через которую Российская Федерация влияла на две южно-кавказские республики, Армению и Азербайджан. Армения себя плохо вела, эта рана начинала болеть у Армении. Скажем, на нас нужно было надавить, эта рана начинала болеть у нас.
They realized that they had lost their leverage over us, and this caused a noticeable coolness and caution in relations. In the story of the airplane, our leadership showed that Azerbaijan is an independent country that does not tolerate humiliating treatment. In the last days of the 40-day war, we shot down a Russian helicopter, but immediately apologized, offered to set up a commission, punish those responsible, and pay compensation to the state and the families of the dead, 2 pilots and a flight engineer. In the case of the civilian airplane, we did not see an equal and partner approach. This is unacceptable. The events in Yekaterinburg are particularly perplexing. The detention of 50 Azerbaijanis, the use of violence, including torture, led to the death of people. Since then, unfriendly actions against the diaspora have become more frequent, including the activation of Roskomnadzor and other activities that restrict freedom. We are ready to respond. If we are not seen as equal partners, Russia loses value in this relationship.
Мы не увидели равного отношения, партнерского отношения, а мы не любим этого. А Екатеринбург, ну это вообще какая-то интересная история. Вы задерживаете людей, бьете их током и забиваете до смерти. Ну что это такое? Ну что это такое? В тот день было задержано 50 человек азербайджанской национальности в Екатеринбурге. И с тех пор идут недружественные акты против диаспоры. Различные мероприятия происходят. Роском сельхознадзор, там какой-то милак, который через границу что-то пропускает, он начал быть активным. Но я думаю, что мы к этому готовы. Но если на нас не смотрят как на равных партнеров, то нам эта Россия подавно не нужна, как бы, да.
After the events with the airplane and the incident in Yekaterinburg, a serious crack in relations between Russia and Azerbaijan appeared. Russia tried to resolve the situation by sending a high-ranking official, but, according to my information, the Azerbaijani leadership did not accept him, and there was no noticeable positive dynamics in the dialogue. Probably Moscow's arguments did not find a proper response in Baku. There have already been military clashes between our countries in history, including the events in the North Caucasus and the 2018 conflict. The memory of the people keeps these episodes, so Russia is not perceived as a friendly party. The interests of the states differ, and in the current conditions, a stable political rift has formed between Azerbaijan and Russia.
Как нас захватывали, как Северный Кавказ захватывали, тогда же мы тоже воевали. Я про 2018 года, да? Да, так что сказать, что у нас в истории в памяти народа Россия как бы воспринимается как страна, как, скажем, что-то такое, нет. Но интересы страны, конечно, диктуют разные. Но вот между государствами есть трещины.
Agil, thank you so much for the conversation and for taking the time. This conversation was really important. I look forward to our next meeting on the air. Thank you for analyzing for me and for our viewers the course of the war between Russia and Ukraine, explaining the principles of asymmetry and the current situation in which neither side has a strategic advantage and the war is turning into a confrontation of attrition. Thank you again. Thank you, Igor.
Вот война идет на истощение. Большое вам спасибо за этот разговор.
Вам спасибо, Игорь.
Goodbye.
Всего хорошего.
A reminder, Agil Rustamzadeh, a military expert from Azerbaijan, was our guest. Subscribe, comment, and share. It helps YouTube promote the video and lets more people understand Russia's war against Ukraine